Good evening, and welcome to Conversations Around the Diocese, a program brought to you by We Are the Church. Please note that the views expressed here are solely those of the speakers and do not represent that of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Our conversation this evening will be facilitated by Monique Castle, a member of the Cathedral Church of St. Diego de la Vega, Spanish Town. Now, sit back, relax, join and enjoy the conversation. Remember that together we are the church.
Good evening, everyone. Allow me to say Happy New Year on behalf of Conversations Around the Diocese, and welcome to our second season and our very first episode. Now, allow me to remind you of our objectives of Conversations Around the Diocese. It is to provide a forum for people to have open conversation around pertinent issues, to help people navigate the world from a scriptural and theological perspective, and to guide people to pray aright. So we go into our topic for this conversation. It's a little somber, but it brings us to a reality that many of us are preparing for: death. Prepared or scared? And so to bring us in our conversation this evening, we have two panelists who will take us through. Allow me to introduce to you our first panelist, Miss Patrice Dwyer. Now, Miss Patrice Dwyer is a complementary and alternative medicine practitioner, lymphedema therapist, certified professional cancer coach, and she's a patient navigator for over 19 years. What is interesting about Miss Dwyer is that she is the giver of life and the mother to beautiful Layla Harmony. I will now ask our Zoom host, Andrew, to do another part of the introduction. Andrew?
My name is Patrice. I'm a planner. Most importantly, I'm a life planner. A planner that helps you look at different transitions in life. Have you ever thought about that? We transition through various stages of life. We get old, sometimes we get ill, and at some point we die. It's not something we like to think about, but because I see people at different stages of their lives, in particular when dealing with healthcare challenges which can be tough without a plan, it's your life. Do you have a plan? If you get sick, what would you want or wish? If your loved one had a sudden illness or accident, ended up in hospital and couldn't speak, can you honestly say you know what their wishes are? This is life. It's dynamic. I want you to think about that. So I've created a resource to help you. It's called It's Your Life. Join me. Let's talk about how you can plan your life now.
And so, friends, at this time, we welcome our first panelist to the conversation. And just to remind you that you are free to put your comments and your questions on Facebook as well as YouTube for further discussion in the conversation. Hi, Ms. Dwyer.
Good evening, Monique. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here to talk about a topic that we kind of shy away from, but it's most important.
Indeed. And so, we just sit and have you start the conversation for us. Death, is it something that we're to be prepared for or scared of?
Well, let's talk about the reality of life. The reality is that we all came here and we're all going to leave at some point. And so I like to bring up this little analogy. When we're pregnant, someone is pregnant, they're going to have a baby. We make a lot of preparation for that. We have cribs, we go to doctor's appointments, we set up nurseries, we do all of this. And when we go into hospital to deliver, we have a whole team of people who are with us, waiting on this baby to arrive. And the reality is that that baby may never get here. But we don't think about that. We're still prepared. We're still prepared for the welcoming of that baby. But the way life is, the baby could die before the baby gets here. That's how our life is. We teach our children about life cycles and all these things, but we don't explain to them that at any point on that life cycle,
things can shift. I like to say life happens. And what do you do when it happens? You have to have a plan for that, right? So I'd like to start the conversation just throwing out some what if questions for people. So what if you woke up and you found yourself in a hospital bed and you just couldn't speak? What would you do? Does your family know what you want in that time, in that space? What if you got the phone call that a family member had a sudden event? What would you do? How prepared would you be for that? What if you got the phone call that your spouse just died and you're left with 2 small kids to take care of? Those are some what if questions that will kind of put us in a space of understanding where we sit, prepared or just scared to the point that we have no plan. All right. So how do you know if you're scared? How do you know if you're scared? Well, there are some questions, some things I throw out to people, because here in Jamaica, there are things that we say we don't want to talk about certain things because if we talk about it, it means it's going to happen. So because of that, we don't make any plans for it, right? So how do you feel about death? Is it that whenever it should occur, that hopefully a long time from now, it's going to take care of itself and things are going to get handled some way, somehow? Or I have a will, I have some life insurance, so I know it's going to be handled. Or I know what I want. I've told my spouse, I've told my child or my friend or somebody, but one day I'll write it down, but I don't have to think about that right now because it's not coming. Or I'm not putting anything down on paper because if I plan for it, it's going to happen soon. Or I just don't think about it, right? All of those things can give you, the audience, a glimpse into how you feel about whether you're scared or more prepared. But what are we scared of? We're scared of something that we know is going to happen at some point, but we don't know what that looks like. And I suggest that what most people are really afraid of is not the death itself, but the dying and what that looks like. So there's a distinction between dying and death. And what happens in the dying process, that more relates to our personal experience. Are we going to feel pain? Are we going to be in a space where we can't take care of ourselves? All of those things sometimes bring up fear. But it's those things that we need to plan for, a sudden event that could put us in a space of dying. I want to share a quick story about one of the reasons this topic is so important to me. I got a phone call one morning that my mother had a sudden event. And that put everything in a different kind of space. You know, you you're at work, you get a phone call, you rush. And I found my mother in a space that, you know, would be difficult for anybody to be in. She had a stroke. And it was 1 year of having to deal with all the things that came with that. But it also put me in a space of having a better understanding of what that journey can be like for others. There were decisions that had to be made sometimes quickly, right? And it wasn't just me. There's my brother, my father. There are people who have to make decisions on your behalf. So it's a challenging space to be in. But one of the things that prepared me for that space was the fact that my mother had been speaking to me since I was very young about what her wishes were. I couldn't understand it then. I always thought, why is she having this conversation with me? But she was always very clear to me about what she wanted in her living space, as in, if I got sick, this is what I want. And for the dying space, what I don't want to be in the hospital. I don't want certain things done to me. And I want to be cremated. And I want my service to look like this, and I want the songs to look like this. She had been preparing me for that since I was a child. And so here we were now in this space, and I was faced with actually executing those things. And it was challenging. And it was also challenging because even though she prepared me and asked me to do that for her, I had to still represent and deal with my family members with regards to all of those things. So that was challenging. But the guide helped me to make the decisions that put her in a space of having what others may term a good death. What is a good death for you? A good death for her was being surrounded by family and friends as she took her last breath with her terms. That was a good death for her. But a good death can look like any different things for different people. And it's important for us to have an understanding of what we want that experience to look like for us. How we want to be in that space of dying, if we have to be in that space, if we get sick, or we have to be in the hospital, what are the things that we want or wish for? And then the death aspect itself, what are the things we need to prepare for that? Most of us will have a will, but have we had a discussion with family about things like, hey, do I want to be cremated? Or, what do I want at my service? What will my legacy be? What am I leaving behind? That's some of the things that we think about when we plan for death itself. We think about the people that we leave behind, because that's going to be the experience that's going to be more important for our loved ones, because we'll be gone, but they'll have to deal with all the things that we have left behind. So those are some of the things that I ask people to think about in planning. What do you want for your living, and what do you want for your dying? In your living, once you put all those things together for your dying, you can live. You can be free to live and do what you want to do. You can check in on those things once a year if you choose, to just know that you have everything in place. So some of the things we do in preparing is sitting down with ourselves and asking ourselves all these questions, and bringing up these what if scenarios. But after we go through and figure out for ourselves these things, such as, if I get sick, what do I want? Who am I going to have to speak for me? The other spaces, then we have a conversation about it, just like we're having a conversation tonight. We have a conversation with our family members and friends, and we let them know what our desires are. And we find out who can assist us in executing those desires. And then, as I'm sure Mr. DePass will speak about later on, then we're going to put some formal things in place to ensure that the things that we want are honored. We can select someone to speak for us on our behalf if we get sick. We often think that it's just next of kin, I'm married, my husband will do certain things for me, or that kind of thing. But your husband may not be the person who is best to speak for you if you get sick. It may be that you need to select somebody else for that role, because he may be not able to handle that pressure in that time, or your wife may not be able to handle that pressure in that time. And so selecting somebody as your healthcare advocate or proxy is something to think about, something to plan for. And also think about the people who are in a space of having anxiety whenever they pick up a form and it's asked for next of kin, because they're either divorced or they have no one in their lives to put there. And they're in this space of anxiety. What if something happens to me? Who am I going to call on to do these things? It's important for us to think about that now, before anything should come up or happen that will put us in a space of feeling totally unprepared and totally, as we say, discombobulated here, So those are some of the main things I wanted you to think about. I'm going to ask for a video to be played now that brings up a scenario of one of these things that could happen that I want you to think about.
If anything happens to me, do what you want. It doesn't matter to me. I leave it to both of you to make the right decision.
Have you decided if you want to put in a feeding tube?
Yes, I think we should.
No, don't do it.
Maybe I should have chosen something. I don't want this feeding tube. I don't want my children fighting each other over me.
It is important to think about your healthcare choices so you can guide your loved ones on how to support you in times of health crisis. Without a plan, you create serious challenges that can impact your quality of life and create rifts in your family as a result. It's Your Life is a workbook that helps you to make a plan so that your will be done and you can maneuver the uncertainties of life and prepare for all outcomes. Get your copy today. Your life could depend on it.
So I want you to think about that. One of the things that happens when people come to see me and we talk about death. So yes, Monique gave a wonderful introduction of me, and she didn't speak to the fact though that as a life planner, I'm actually also an end of life planner. So we're not just planning for living, but we're planning for the end of that space. And I wear the hat of death doula, which most people don't understand or know about. But in that role, what I do is help people to prepare for the living in transition, as I call it, or others may refer to it as dying, and prepare for death. And sometimes that can look like helping people to start to think, do some introspection and figure out what it is that they want for themselves. Like Miss Bell in the video, she had that conversation with her sons because, well, she had a friend who had died and she just started to think about, well, you know, I want to make it easier for my children. If anything happens, then they just do what they want, you know. But she wasn't thinking that, well, it's difficult to do that because if you have 3 or 4 people having to make a decision on your behalf, you end up in a space where each person could have a different idea of what is best for you. And if you don't even know what that is, can you imagine how confusing or difficult it would be for your family if you're lying there like she was thinking, because she couldn't speak. So she was thinking those things that we heard her say, and they're having to make a decision, not knowing how to honor her. So this is why I say to people, first you have to stop and think about that. And then after you do that, you're able to share with others what you need and what your wishes are so that they can help you execute them. Don't just think family know you. And we may know a lot about you as your family, but there are certain things that we still don't know. So as a death doula, that's one of the things I help people do, to plan for that. When people have serious illness and we have to have these conversations, it's very challenging. So I encourage people to start planning from now. I have plans, and my 9-year-old daughter knows my plans. I have conversations with her about it because she's seen me go through the process of working with others, including her grandmother, and what we had to go through in that process. And she asks questions and I openly answer them because it's important for her to understand, in my opinion, as well. And so we have to plan for that. I also sometimes sit with family and facilitate family meetings about all of these things so that the person can get their ideas out without necessarily feeling like they're the only one in the room who has an understanding. Or they may just need somebody to be their kind of strong back, just sit there with them to give them the courage to speak up about what their wishes are with family and friends. But it's useful to have those conversations open with family so they know what your wishes are. And then also, as a death doula, I serve in the space of sitting bedside with people as they make their transition and helping family to go through some of the things that may be coming up next. If someone dies at home, what are the things you need to know? What are the things you need to plan for? What are the numbers you need to have written down so you can just execute things? Because you don't know what kind of space you're going to be in when that happens. And so these are some of the things that we do. And then also supporting family after. A lot of support is needed as people have to process, in addition to their grief. People have to process the practical things. What do I do now? I have to go and get a burial order. I have to sort through paperwork and banking details and insurance details and just the simple things. I have to pay some bills that I never paid before. And those things can be a lot if we don't have a plan. If we don't talk to our spouse who was paying all the bills and know where those things are and have an idea how to navigate all of that before they may be ill or die suddenly. So these are some of the things I wanted to share with you guys tonight. I mean, I could talk about this all night and in so many different ways, but I'd really just love to hear from you, your thoughts about how prepared you think you are. How much planning have you done for your living? and you're dying. In the times we live in now, we've been getting news every day of someone who's sick or dying with COVID, or just decisions that family has to make on your behalf. How prepared are you to be in that space for your own self, and to be in that space if you need to be, or if you're called to be, for your family or your loved ones? Thank you for listening to me tonight, and I'm looking forward to your questions and having more conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dwyer, for opening the conversation with this reality check, let me just say, because I think that's what it is. And as a death doula, I was listening to you speak, and it resonated with me that in your capacity, you really help people to prepare for the real end of time, literally, because that's what it is. When you mentioned that, well, in the video, and you know, when you were speaking about helping persons to prepare, do you work with the church in terms of, or you know, some persons will call their priest or their pastor to be with them at this time as well. Do you work in collaboration with, if so desired, with these persons?
Well, for me, it's always important to find out what someone's belief is, whatever that is. And because for holistic care, that's an important part of that process. Oh, you know, what are your beliefs about living and dying or afterlife? Those things come up, and it's important for people to have the support of their spiritual advisor with them. I worked with someone the latter part of last year, an older lady, elder in her 90s, who was dying. And one of the things when I sat beside her the day before she died was she was Catholic, and there were certain hymns that she loved. But her family, they were not in that space with her. They didn't know the hymns. But I did. I grew up Catholic. I knew all those hymns, and I knew she loved that. And I started playing some songs for her. And she responded to those songs. She started smiling in that space and just really got calm. And they were like, oh, I don't know this music. I don't know this music. And I said, yeah, this is her music. The following day, she died. Her son called me, and he said, in the morning, he said, I want to play some of that music for Mama. Can you send me the link? And I did. And they just sat with her playing the music peacefully until she went. Mm-hmm. These are some of the things that are critical. They're important to people. She was moving her lips to the songs that were a part of her, you know, her whole life. But family didn't necessarily know that. You see, which is why it's always important to be clear about what you want that to look like for yourself, and the people who will be in place to support that. So in the planning process, I ask people to put down, for example, if there's a specific minister or, you know, church that you are connected with. If a sudden event happens, please write the name down so family can make contact with this person.
Okay.
Or this church, or because we assume family will know and they don't necessarily know.
I see. So in terms of, because there are quite a few persons who will say, you know, they don't fear it. In telling my friends about this topic coming up for the conversation, one person said, well, I'm not ready for it yet, so I'm just not gonna watch the conversation. And another friend said, well, I'm ready, so I'm going to watch the conversation because I want to know all about particularly what you do in terms of preparing people. Do you find that young persons are open to thinking that this is a reality and it may happen? How do I prepare?
I think more so now, because this whole era of COVID has brought that on. have people, you have young people who are dying suddenly, and it's impacting the community. My journey had me exploring death really early. I had a friend who died when I was 6 years old and she was 7, and that was sudden. I had another friend who had a sudden death, tragic death, when I was 13 and he was 16. I had another friend who died at 21 suddenly. It had me recognizing early, which brought up some of my fears that, oh my, this thing can actually happen to someone when they're young. And so we don't like to think about that, but it's happening more and more. And so I do find that people are more open to at least having a conversation about what that looks like. I recently, when I launched my book, I had someone come on to speak about the fact that her sons, who were 18 and 21, both had plans. They had their advanced care plans and their stuff for dying at 21 and 18. They had it in place, but their mom is a nurse. She's seen the space. She understands what happens, so she has conversations with them about that, right? So it's happening more. I see a lot of young women in particular with breast cancer who are faced with that reality as well, and having to have that conversation with themselves and with family. And so there are more people who are becoming familiar with the space, but I see my role as someone who will encourage people to think about the space in a different way. It's not being morbid or anything like that. It's just being practical, having a practical conversation about something that's inevitable and making preparation for that as we would for a retirement or anything else. Not obsessing on it every day. Make the plan, know it's there. Just like when you go for your annual checkup, you check in with it to make sure that everything is in order, or anything you need to tweak, or if some of your thoughts change about something, you can then update it. But it gives you that freedom to live your life more freely,
Right.
because you know you have something in place.
All right. Okay, so it is in essence a lot more than somebody telling you that they want to have the setup and the church program and have all the programs lined out. Right, because I think that's as far as some people go. They will tell you that they want the setup and they have the church program ready, but it just seems to be a whole lot more than that.
Well, that's the least, to be honest. It actually is the least of that, because you'll be dead then. And that will be for your family to work through. So when you make those types of plans, you're actually showing love and care and support for your loved ones that you're leaving behind to handle your remains. Right? And that's important too. It's a very important piece, because I've seen people come to blows over that. Cremation or burial. Thankfully, we don't, well, I don't know if thankfully, but we don't have all the other options that are available elsewhere. And there are a whole lot now in terms of dealing with remains. The main options we have: cremation, burial, body donation. I've seen that topic come up that created a bit of a stir for some family members. When a family member decided I wanted to donate my body.
Okay.
Right? So those are some of the things that we don't necessarily think about, but if you just put that in your will for your family to pick up and see it, is like, nobody knew that your head was in that space.
Yes. All right. And on that note, we are going to invite our other panelists to join the conversation. And so we welcome Mr. Peter DePass. He is a Wolmerian, and that seems to have been his proud, quite a badge for him. And he's also an attorney at law with over 30 years experience. Mr. DePass practices mainly in the area of commercial and corporate law, real estate, and property law. Mr. DePass is a member of the St. Luke's Church Crossroads, and he is the registrar of the Diocese of Jamaica, as well as the provincial registrar for the Church of the Province of the West Indies. Mr. DePass, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Monique. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Right. And you've been listening to Miss Dwyer.
Yes, I have been, and she has made so many good points, and I am hoping to expand on a couple of things she has said from a legal perspective.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so we now invite you to share your aspect of death, prepared or scared, to the conversation.
Thank you. So I have a presentation which is in, okay, thank you.
Great.
Going to be shared, yes. So it's death, prepared or scared. So I'm a Christian. So from a Christian perspective, let me just say that if we are resurrection people and we believe in victory over the grave, then we really ought not to be scared. We have victory over death through our Lord Jesus Christ. And so if in our lifetime we have sought to be imitators of our Lord and sought to be a part of his kingdom here on earth, I would think that we should not be scared. On the other hand, the Bible also tells us that we should be prepared. We have Matthew 25 with the story of the 10 virgins, some who had their lamps with oil, 5 did not. The bridegroom came, and when the 5 of them had to go and seek oil, the 5 who were prepared went with him. And when they came with their oil, they were shut out, they were late. So that passage in the Bible encourages us all to be prepared for whatever eventuality we need to be. So the Bible encourages us not to be scared, and the Bible encourages us at all times to be prepared. And there are many other passages in the Bible that encourages us to be prepared. So that being said, we can move on to the next slide. So we go through life, as Patrice pointed out, and we at some point we have to go. But during our lifetime, we acquire things along the way. And what are some of those things we acquire during our lifetime? We work, so we may have some money, bank accounts. We may have saved a little and put away some investments. We may own land. We may have an apartment, or we may have a house. We may have taken out some insurance policy, as Patrice mentioned. We may have shares in a company. We may have been particularly creative in our lifetime. So we may have written a book. We may have invented something. We may have written some music. You know, we may have created a product and created a trademark for it, have a logo for it, you know. We may own a car. And of course, in our house, we may have many different things: our fridge, our stove, our gardening stuff, our furniture. Some people have a lot of jewelry to adorn them during their lifetime. And some may have acquired a lot of artwork. Whatever it is, there are things we own during our lifetime. Next slide. So some of the other things we own too, if we are self-employed, for instance, or we had a business with somebody, we may have business assets. Is the business a company? Is it a partnership? If it's a company, we would have shares. If it's a partnership, we would have partnership assets. So would you, after you pass, wish your executors or other persons to run your business? Or is it that you wish the business to be sold? Those are some things you want to consider and you want to discuss and think about, as Patrice suggested, before you pass on. If you have a business, are there competent persons around to run the business? If they are not, you may want to consider some other path. Do you sell it, or whatever it is you need to do? Next slide. So because we have these things that we own during our lifetime or we acquire during our lifetime, we need to make a plan, as Patrice pointed out. We need to make a plan. We need to be prepared as good Christians. So what if I become ill? You know, you saw the slide that Patrice had with mom in hospital and her children. What if I become ill or incapacitated before death? Will mental health issues overtake me? Dementia and Alzheimer's are some of the things we have to consider. So do I have family members who I've spoken to about these things? Am I a single person? Do I have a cousin or a close person? Would I want to consider having a power of attorney in place in case something goes wrong and I am unable to help myself? That power of attorney can be to a family member, can be to a child, can be to a spouse, can be to a close friend, a trusted friend. You know, that power of attorney can allow someone to deal with your bank accounts, pay your bills, deal with your investments, deal with any monies you are to collect, and handle your business while you're laid up or ill. Remember though, that power of attorney ends with your death, so that power of attorney may not see you through after you have passed on. So a power of attorney then is a useful thing to consider for illnesses and if you have health issues. Your power of attorney, we don't have living wills in Jamaica, but a power of attorney could give the donee the right to give consent to making medical decisions on your behalf as well. So a power of attorney can be a useful tool for illness before death. Next slide. So in making your plan, who is it for death? Who is it would I want to benefit in terms of the things I own? I may have children. I may have children who are minors. I may have relatives who have been very good to me during my lifetime and who have supported me through thick and thin, and I want to benefit. There may have been friends, trusted friends who have supported you and been good to you, and you want to benefit them as well. There are charities around that you may want to benefit. Charities that deal with poverty or housing or helping persons in distress that you may want to benefit if you have that extra. You may want to benefit your school, your university, where you attended that provided you with the education that allowed you to achieve much in your lifetime. And you may want, of course, to benefit your church, to see as a good steward, to see to the continued development and the sharing of the gospel of Christ in the world. So those are some of the things or some of the persons or institutions you may want to benefit. Continue, slide. So sometimes we don't own a lot. We may have one asset, one person coming to say, me, the only thing I have, Mr. DePass, is my house. Or we may have a lot of assets. We may have a lot of different things. So in making a preparation, what is it we do? We can take pen and pencil, or if we are technologically inclined and can do an Excel spreadsheet and we have a lot of things, we can just type out or write down what are the things we own and then decide in our own minds what are the things, how we want these things to be distributed after we die. Next slide. So how do we prepare and make plans for these things which we own if we die? And the law provides a mechanism for doing this. And this is through a bit of legislation which we call the Wills Act. Now, in order to make that will, we have to comply with the formalities set out in the Wills Act. So one of the things is we must be 18 years or older. We must be of sound mind. We must be prepared. The will must be prepared free from fraud, force, or duress. Nobody should be pressuring you to do anything. Your daughter or your son or your husband mustn't be over your head with a stick saying you have to do this or you have to do that, because that can invalidate the will if it is challenged after your death. Finally, it must be in writing. So you have to put pen and paper. It doesn't need to be prepared by a lawyer. You can do it on your own, but it must be in writing. Slide. So in preparing that will, are you going to do it on your own, or you need to engage an attorney? Well, I would always want to suggest it is most prudent to engage an attorney who is experienced in will preparation, because they may be able to guide you as to how you can document how you want the things you own to pass on. Executors. Now, a will ought to have executors. The executors are the persons who, by law, will carry out your wishes as stated in your will. So they will apply for probate. That's a big word that some persons don't know, but it's called probating a will. And the Supreme Court or the parish court will give its consent to a will after application by the executors. So the Wills Act allows you to have up to 4 executors, but we usually advise persons to have 2 executors. So if one passes or one is unable, there's another one who can act. Now, there ought to be witnesses to the will you prepare, whether you do it on your own or you have an attorney prepared for you. The witnesses cannot be beneficiaries. They must be present to see you affixing your signature to the will. Both must be present and see you affix your signature to the will. The persons who witness your will, the attesting witnesses we call them, must also sign and subscribe their names to the will. And importantly, you must be clear as to the description of the assets you want to convey. Suppose you have different parcels of land or different houses. You want to be clear as to which house you want to leave to whom, which car you want to leave to whom. If you want one investment in one bank to go to one son and the investment in another to go to a daughter, you need to be clear as to the investment or the house or the business or the financial institution that has that investment. So clarity is important for the will. You want to identify the beneficiaries carefully and clearly, their names, where they live, perhaps, because sometimes the executors may not be able to find these persons. So you want to say where they are, where they can be found. It's prudent to do that. It may be the case that everybody knows who the person is, but sometimes the executors may not know, or other beneficiaries may not know where to locate these persons. So it's always prudent to be clear. So I've said there, addresses of testator, executors, beneficiaries, and witnesses should all be clearly stated in the will. Now, there's always a clause in the will which we advise persons to include, which deals with residuary assets, or we call the residuary estate. You may be bequeathed assets which you don't know about at the time you're making your will, or somebody else may have decided to leave something for you, which you're not aware of at the time you passed on. And so those assets can be captured in what we call a residuary clause, which deals with anything else that you may own, which you have not specifically made a bequest for in the will. Finally, your will should be dated. So everybody knows and the court knows the date the will was made. Slide. So as part of the preparation of the will, you may be blind, you may be illiterate, or for some reason ill or incapacitated and can't use your hand to make your mark. So you can make an X, or someone can make it on your behalf. It just needs to be stated that you authorize X to make it on your behalf. And this is why sometimes having a lawyer prepare it is good, because the attorney will know how to address a situation like that in preparation of the will. If you are signing or making your mark, it must be made at the foot of the will. That is after you have set out all the persons you wish to leave your various things you own to. Were you married prior to making of your will, or will you be getting married after you have prepared your will? So if you have made a will and you get married a week or two after, that will would be invalid according to the Wills Act. You should be married with, if you're going to be married, you should await your marriage to make a new will. You can make one before you're married, but certainly if you're getting married, you need to make another one after you have become married, because your will can be invalidated because of that. So as I said before, you need to be 18 years or over, or your will be invalid. And any gift to any person who witnesses your will be void. Slide. So there are some special considerations that need to be taken into account when you're making your will. Things which are jointly owned are void under your will, usually. So bank accounts or investments which are jointly owned, if you leave a bequest in your will for them, those things, that provision in the will be void. So if you have a joint account with your spouse and you leave the monies in that account to someone else, that provision in the will would be void, because the bank accounts automatically, the bank account you held with your spouse would automatically go to the spouse on your death. The same with real estate. Now, if you have property which you own as tenants in common with another proprietor, you can will your share in the property to whomever you wish. So property owned as tenants in common, you can will your share in the property under your will. Insurance policies. If your insurance policy has as its beneficiary your estate, then your will have to be probated in order to pass the proceeds of the insurance policy onto your estate. And then the funds from that policy will be dealt with in accordance with your will. So if there was a residuary clause, then it would form part of your residuary estate. If you made a specific bequest in your will as to who would get the proceeds of that policy, then that wish will be carried out. In many instances, though, it is prudent to name a beneficiary in your will or on your insurance policy, so that you need not go through the process of probating a will just to get the proceeds of insurance. In many instances, the proceeds of the insurance policy is sometimes used to even bury you when you pass on. So it may be prudent to just leave a named beneficiary or beneficiaries on the policy of insurance. Slide. So what are some other special considerations for inclusion in your will? And Patrice mentioned some of these things. Sometimes there are arguments after you have passed as to whether you ought to be cremated or not. it's prudent to include in your will a direction for cremation if you wish to be cremated. If you wish to be buried, you should give direction. It is prudent to give directions for your burial. You may want to specify where you wish to be buried. If you want your ashes placed at a certain spot or thrown over the sea or on the mountains or something, you should give directions for that in your will and make your executors aware of what you're doing. You may want to be buried according to the rites of the Anglican Church, but your son is Seventh-day Adventist, and your son may decide he wants you to be churched in a Seventh-day Adventist church. So it may be prudent, if you want to have an Anglican funeral and burial according to the rites of the Anglican Church, that you state it in your will. You may wish to donate your body for medical purposes, for research, for transplanting, or that kind of thing. If you wish to do that, it is also prudent to say so in your will. Slide. So, some things to consider also when preparing your will. Do you want to give someone a life interest in the property? So you may have an elderly parent who is unable to fund himself, keep himself or herself in care, or they need to have a roof over their heads, and they need to have some sort of income which allows for them to be taken care of. So you may want to give that person a life interest in the property so that the beneficiaries, the persons who you ultimately want to benefit, don't throw them out of the house. And you may also want to say that funds from X investment be used, or rental income from this house or this property be used to take care of them. So you may want to consider putting that in your will. And I've found that in many, many instances, this is a very, very useful provision to consider, especially when dealing with vulnerable children or elderly persons. So you may have children who are minors under the age of 18, under 16. Your executors may not be in a position to take care of them. You may have a good aunt or good cousin or trusted friend whom you have discussed with the possibility of your dying, and you may want them to take care of the minors. So again, you may consider it appropriate to appoint those persons as guardians of your children. And you may want to also, if you are able, to indicate in your will how financial provision is to be made for them. And then you may want to consider, as I said before, whether you want to leave property on trust for your executors, to sell property, to invest property, to lease property, and to apply the income to maintain those children or that elderly parent or dependent. Slide. So, wills made overseas or in Jamaica. Sometimes you have lived all your entire life in the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom, and you come home because you want to spend the rest of your life in Jamaica. But you have property in the UK, for example, and you also have property here in Jamaica. So your will, once it conforms to the Wills Act, will be valid here in Jamaica. And it has to be probated here if property is located here. If the will is made in a Commonwealth country like Canada or UK, and it relates only to property in Jamaica, it can be probated once it was executed in Jamaica. If the will covers property in Jamaica and another Commonwealth country, it can be probated either in that Commonwealth country or in Jamaica. And we have a process called resealing. So if it's probated, say in the UK, it can be resealed by the Supreme Court here. If it is probated in Jamaica, it can be resealed in the United Kingdom for the assets there to be distributed. And the final paragraph there says that an application for resealing would be accompanied by a certified copy of the probate and the copy of the will. Slide. So you can also make separate wills to cover property in different countries. This is usual when you are dealing with a country which is not a Commonwealth country. So for instance, if you have property in the United States and you have property in Jamaica, and you make each 2 wills to cover property in the States and property to cover property in Jamaica, each of those wills should say that the other will covers assets in the other jurisdiction and is binding. So it should be clear that the assets in each jurisdiction, in each will, are separate from those in the other jurisdiction. So when you're making wills of this sort, where you have 2 wills in 2 different jurisdictions, you shouldn't use the words last will and testament, or that you revoke all former wills. You omit those words so as not to make the other will of no effect. Another thing to consider is that property, and I said it before, property owned by the testator testatrix in the United States requires a separate will. On the death of testator, the will should be probated in the United States because the US is a different jurisdiction that is outside of the Commonwealth. Slide. So, as you know, when you pass on, your executors will have the responsibilities of probating your will and distributing the assets. So it's important for you to consider whether they will have sufficient funds to deal with the expenses. Have you identified a bank account from which those testamentary expenses are to be shared? Have you discussed it with any of your beneficiaries? Have you said to the daughter, or the friend, or the trusted person, I would like my executor to use these funds to do that, you know? Or you may, as I indicated, use an insurance policy for the purposes of funeral expenses and testamentary expenses. You always have to bear in mind that your executors are entitled under law to a commission of 6%. So in many instances, persons use their children as executors so that that expense may be minimized. Slide. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. So one other thing I wanted to say before I go is that you may also, if you consider it prudent and you can pay the necessary government taxes, consider also adding children to the title to your property, your land, your house, or an apartment, as a means of minimizing estate taxes and foregoing the need to enter into an application for probate or that kind of thing. So that is another estate planning mechanism that can be used. So it is always prudent to consider that outside of making a will, if you want to benefit certain persons and you don't wish them to have that extra added expense or burden to go through the process of probating a will. So those are my thoughts, friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DePass, for giving us that wealth of information on how, how prepared we can be. And I like how you put the spin that you put on it, that, the reminder, we are resurrection people. And so really we should be more in a space of preparation rather than fear. There are a few questions that I have written here for both Ms. Dwyer and Mr. DePass. One of the questions I have is, there are many times when parents plan for their individual deaths, and oftentimes, well, I don't want to say oftentimes, but sometimes that happens. But in the event of a joint death, for example, a car accident per se, how do you advise parents to plan for that kind of event when they have to take into consideration their children, who would be their caregiver, who would do the general caring, and take care of things like education and such? How do you guide parents with that?
Patrice, you wanted to go first?
Well, I mean, it's in line with a lot of what you outlined before, in terms of the will, the provisions that you make. But the most important thing, as always, is this conversation with each other as a couple. First off, to say, well, we have kids now, we have to think about that. If something happens to both of us at the same time, are there people that we can identify from now that we would possibly want to take charge of our children? And are we going to sit and have a conversation with these people first off to find out if they feel that they can handle that responsibility? So that's important. And then if they agree, then you will go over to Mr. DePass and create a document to ensure that if something should happen like that your children will be cared for. And it may be even a conversation to have with your children. That if something happens, because like I said, I've had it with my daughter. If something happens, mommy may ask uncle and auntie so-and-so to take care of you if something happens to mommy and daddy. So that there's this understanding. And there's also an understanding that could change, in terms of who you select or what would happen in that space.
Yeah, I would just like to say that medically, if say both parents died in a car accident, one is really deemed to die before the other. So I usually advise couples to make a will if the wills can be similar, and the one will provide for what happens if one predeceases the other. So even if they die in a joint accident, one is deemed to die before the other. So the will can properly make preparation for what happens if one predeceases the other. So if there are joint assets held, the wife would say in her will, if so-and-so predeceases me, then I leave so-and-so to so-and-so. And the husband would have a similar provision in his will. So if the wife is deemed medically to have died before him, then the will would provide that so-and-so, if she predeceases me, I leave so-and-so to so-and-so. And of course, as I said before, in the case of children, it's always prudent to consider if you have minors, whether you want guardians to take care of them. And in preparation, you not only discuss it with the children or your close relatives, but actually put pen to paper and say it in your will that this is what you want to happen. And you may need to go further, say how you wish for them to be taken care of from a financial point of view, because you can't rely always on the guardians to be forking up the money to do what is necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And this is providing you would have had all the things that you mentioned before, Mr. DePass, your insurance policies, any kind of property, whether here or in another Commonwealth country or so, right?
Right. And let me say this, if you had no will at all and minors are involved, then the estate has to go through what we call an application for administration. And the Administrator General takes charge when there are minors involved. And they have the say as to how assets are dealt with in terms of keeping those children. So, and that is usually a process one doesn't necessarily want to happen because, it is difficult and there's that close family kind of personal touch when you have the Administrator General dealing with the estate, especially when they have children involved. So, yes.
Thank you, Mr. DePass. And as we talk about the things that can be willed, I was just wondering, are there things that legally cannot be willed, or can everything be put in a will?
Well, you don't want to necessarily make the will too cumbersome and overloaded, but once it is something that is owned by you, it is your property, you can will that property. You can't obviously will property that is not your own. So
Right.
one of the processes that the executor goes through after the death of the person is ascertaining what are the assets owned by this individual, so that you can't really put in your will or make provision for something which you do not own.
Can I
Okay. Sure,
jump
go
in
right
and
ahead,
say
Mr.
something there?
Yes,
One
go
of the
right
things
ahead.
that I've found in my experience as people prepare to leave things for family and friends, especially the elderly, is that they may leave a whole lot of things, but family they really don't have an interest in some of these things. And you know, in my whole training with this doula aspect, we talk to people about legacy, and we talk to people about preparing and organizing, just as you said, Mr. DePass, all your things, from listing things and all of that. But one of the things I encourage people to do as well is, if there's something that's really valuable to you, whether it's just a little piece of china, a teapot that your great-grandmother had, or something like that, if you're going to put in your will, you're going to leave that to your grandchild, who at this age has no clue about China or anything like that, and may have no interest. It may be useful to actually have a conversation with your grandchild and talk to them about the history behind this teapot. And let them know that, you know, my great-grandmother had this, I have this, whatever, and this is where it came from, this is what it means. It could be jewelry, it could be anything like that. So that it actually has some significant value, you know, to that person. They understand the story behind it and that connection to you, which is what people want to express when they put in their will, I want to give this to so-and-so. It's because it has such value to them. They want to share it with somebody else. But if the person doesn't understand that, or if they don't like artwork and you want to leave them 10 pieces of art, you know, you may have your alma mater Woolmers that you want to, hey, let's sell the artwork and give it to them. Because so it's important to, as we process and organize, that we are very mindful in that process. We know exactly why and have conversations again with people about these things.
Right.
So right there, Patrice, you need to be practical and pragmatic when making preparations as well.
Right. Okay. So we actually had a poll question out on YouTube and Facebook. And the question was, have you drafted your will? And 50% of our respondents said yes. And of course, the other 50 said no. So there are still quite a few of us out there who have really not yet jumped onto that wagon. But I really think, based on what the conversation is unfolding so far, we need to get onto it. And note I said we. But yes, you know, this preparing for this conversation has really, you know, opened my eyes about certain things, and just listening to the real talk right about now, there are some things that I really need to get onto. So thank you both for this enlightenment. But I just wanted to ask another question to both of you, though. What are some of the typical problems that you encounter as you prepare persons for, as you know, in this line of business? For Mr. DePass, from your perspective as the lawyer helping to prepare the will, and for Ms. Dwyer helping your patients or your clients to understand what is happening. What are some of the typical problems that you will come across?
For me, one of the challenges I see people face is just not understanding enough about their bodies and about their desires in that way. You know, they don't know. So we had that thing with Miss Bella and the feeding tube. Well, if you don't know what a feeding tube is, you're hardly going to know if you're going to need that. Or what that may feel like to make a decision on whether or not that's something I would want or not want. You know, Mr. DePass mentioned we don't, our law doesn't recognize living wills. But I speak to people about that, and I speak to them about getting a power of attorney that's responsible for your healthcare choices, right? Because but you can't, if you don't understand those things, then you won't know how to make a choice then, right? So talking to people about having conversations with your doctor, for example, when you go for your next visit, hey, you know, I'm putting together some documentation here. I need to have a clear understanding about some of these things, just to clear it up for myself so that I can think about where my head is at with that, so I can have a conversation with my family and put what I need to put in place. So that is something that's important. And just this, the aspect of just being in denial in this space of, well, I don't know, I'm going to write it in, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And we're in that space of I'm going to. And then we hit crisis. And then in crisis mode, people are running around trying to make these decisions when it's really, really, really difficult. Then if you're really sick, to be talking about death every day it's difficult when you're in that space, you know? So those are some of the things that I see, and just organization. People don't even know what they have. We talk about putting assets in place. We have so many things. We don't even know what we have half the time. And so going through that process, it's kind of tedious, but it's important to know where you have, what you have, and also where they are. No point in having an insurance policy with a beneficiary if they can't find the policy.
Right.
Because what they may know you have it, but they can't find the physical policy. Where are your things? Where are your passport? Where's your birth certificate? Where are all these things that you're going to need if something happens? Are they in a central location that people will know to look for them there? You know, some of those things.
Okay, Mr. DePass, thanks for that. Mr. DePass?
Some of the things I find is sometimes a little challenge is explaining to persons the difference between, say, tenancy in common or joint tenancy. And also sometimes persons want to tie up their property into successive generations. They want the home to remain a family home for forever on. Sometimes they have children who reside abroad who have no interest whatsoever in property here, and it goes to make the will a little bit more cumbersome. So sometimes you have to play not only legal advisor, but advise somehow in terms of practical considerations when the will is being prepared. Sometimes persons don't realize they also need to make preparation for their children and for how, you know, their education, their maintenance, if they pass on. And sometimes that is a very, or elderly parents or relatives. Those are very, very critical things, because sometimes out of the blue you pass on and your mom, whom you took care of, is left by the wayside by other relatives who are just seeking to grab. So those are some of the things, very practical things that we come across, and we find that we have to stretch ourselves to give the client the best advice possible.
Right. Mr. DePass, I'm going to continue on that though and ask, when you mentioned the issue of being married and having gotten married, it is best to make another will after. Will the will become invalid with divorce?
No, if okay, let me explain. If you had a will before you were married and you got married, that will would be invalid. If you passed on and say the spouse you got married to challenge that will, it will be declared by the court invalid. If, however, you made the will after you got married and you then subsequently divorce that party, it would be prudent to make another will after that divorce. However, if you didn't change your will, that will would stand, you know, terms of whatever provisions you made for it, including if you made a provision for the divorce spouse. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that. And so
Yeah.
the poll respondents are changing. So we're now up to 54% of our respondents saying yes, they have drafted a bill, and a will, and 46% saying no. So I think there are quite a few persons who are, out there who are very aware of what is happening and how they should prepare. So the next question that I wanted to put forward for both of you to answer is, what do you do when the decision made by the dying person seems unaffordable? Let's say, for example, they're making wishes for funeral arrangements, they want to be cremated, and they know the family cannot afford that, but they are making these dying wishes. How is that handled? I don't know if Ms. Dwyer wants to take that first, or Mr. DePass.
Well, back to being practical again. We have practical conversations with people. Okay, what do you want? You want this? This is what it costs. Most of us don't know. I know from my very first experience that I had in planning a funeral. At that time, I didn't realize how expensive certain aspects of it was, And so if you don't know, you really will just have all these things, or that you have in mind, and you don't think about them. But it's important to be practical. You say you want something, let's figure out what that something is going to cost.
Right.
Let everybody know this is what it's going to cost. And it's fine if you have provisions in place to cover it. So if you have some insurance out there, or something, as Mr. DePass spoke to, that is going to be responsible for your burial and your funeral and all of that, that's fine. Then what you want is what you want. But if it's going to be something that you're going to rely on others to facilitate, then you have to be clear that that makes no sense, And the other side to that is, if you want it and your family feel, why she want that, and you didn't put anything in place to say, hey, this is what I want, then that's also a challenge too. That's also a challenge. When my mother died, she wanted to be cremated. A lot of Jamaicans are not into cremation. It's becoming more popular now.
Yes, it is.
But they're expecting, when they walk into a church, to see a body.
Yes.
And there was none. And so I heard, so where's the body? And so it's like, well, that's not what she wanted. Huh? No, she didn't want that. And so how do you feel? And also speaking to the people who are going to be asked to make these decisions. If you feel that you honestly cannot honor somebody's wishes, you should tell them. You should let them know, I'm not the person to do this. Because I honestly I cannot line up with that. I can't align with it, and I can't make that decision for you. So just be honest about that, so you don't put yourself in a space of having to do something that your spirit basically is saying no to.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Patrice. It all boils down to what are, practical considerations. Do I have the funds to do this? Do I have the funds to do that? Have I discussed this with those close to me, that this is my wish? And of course, money is always a part of the conversation. Right. It has to be, because things cost. So if I die and I want to be buried here, where are the funds going to come from? The truth is, a lot of people don't have that discussion. Unfortunately, that is the case. And then it is left up to the children to fight as to who give the money first and who give the most of the money and all of this kind of thing. So that happens. But it is prudent to have that discussion, or make actual monetary preparation for it.
Okay, and thank you. And jumping on that question, I have another question that was posted. How do you prepare loved ones for dealing with and executing the decisions that they may not necessarily like, the decisions of the dying person? So a person in transition may want to be cremated, and for example, I may not be prepared to do that. How do you prepare me to handle that wish?
Well, Monique, it goes back to what I just said. If you know
Mhm.
you can't do it, don't agree to be that person,
Okay.
right?
But if I'm the child, but if it's
If
my
you're the
mother.
child, it may be your mother, but you may not be that person. And so we spoke about, okay, so that's if they die, and you're talking about cremation and all of that. So there's that. But there's the space before that, which is really critical that we don't talk about. When somebody's lying on a bed and their decisions being made over them, that's impacting them in that space, whether it's decisions about nursing care or whatever it is. That's a space that you want quality of life, even all the way up until you take your last breath. If there are not provisions in place for that, you are the one who's going to suffer. So in that space, if you were going to select a power of attorney to handle your healthcare choices, you need to select somebody who you know is going to honor your wishes, even if they don't agree with them. There were some things that my mother requested that I was not on board with. And I, as a daughter, in my daughter hat, said, you try and cook. Are you sure you don't? And the answer was big up no, right? And then I had to decide, who I was in that space. Was I the person who I agreed to be to support her in her choices, or am I going to be the daughter who just wants mommy to be doing certain things to improve or whatever? And so I had to put on the hat of, I'm this person who you asked to do this. And so I don't agree with it. And I would even say, mommy, I don't like this, but you asked me to do this. So I'm going to honor that. So that is very important. You have to know how capable you are of handling it. And that's why I said before, it may not be your husband who can be your power of attorney for your healthcare choices. Honey, you do everything else. But my sister is the only person I can entrust with this because I know she's going to honor me. So that's key.
And I'll endorse that, Monique. It's a matter, it goes back to making the preparation and having someone whom you can trust to make the decisions that you wish to happen when you are dying and in death.
Okay. I have one final question before we go into our final reflection. This question I found interesting. What if a minor should have assets, and they die before the parents? Do the parents become the automatic beneficiaries?
Well, as I indicated, a minor can't make a will, so those assets would automatically be the property of the parent or guardian.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you kindly.
Yeah.
All right. So we are now winding down our conversation, and there are questions that are popping. We're winding the conversation, and so we invite both of you to do your final closing in a minute, even though there's still so much to talk about. But we'll begin with you, Patrice. Your final comments on how to prepare.
Be prepared. Talk to yourself. Talk to your family. Put it down in writing. Those are the three things. Be in awareness that before you actually die, there could be a space of dying where you need care, and you need to know what that care is going to look like. If you need help to make a plan for that care, there are people like myself and others who can help you to make a plan, or facilitate you making a plan for that. There are people like Mr. DePass who can help you to plan your estate. And so those are the things that I want to leave with people today. Start talking to yourself and being clear about who you are and what you want, so that you can express that to those who you're going to leave to handle your business. And one thing I need to put out there as well is we need to have somebody who we can really, really trust to be that person to clean up your mess as well. Many people leave things on their telephones, on their everything, that creates a challenge for those behind. And you also have to consider who's going to clean up your house. If you have a house of 40 years of stuff, who's going to be that person to deal with these things? If there are things you don't want them to find, you're going to get rid of them, or you're going to call Mary Jane and say, if anything happened to me, you have the password to my phone, you have this, you have that, you're my cleaner upper. I've seen those
Okay.
things create big challenges for people.
Okay.
So
Wow.
that's my little two-piece here tonight to
Oh,
leave.
thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. DePass.
I would just like to underscore what I said at the start. Be prepared and be not scared. And a part of that preparation goes, meaning while you are of sound mind and nothing is wrong with you, put in place a plan. Please put in place a plan. Whether you're 22 years old or you're 65 years old, you need to make a plan. There are some things you acquire along the way. You may have just bought your first apartment and moved in. Anything can happen. Once you are of age, make a plan. Think about what would happen to you if you die or you become seriously ill, and make a plan for it. And there are professionals out there, not only lawyers, but persons as like Patrice, who can assist you in making a plan to prepare for the eventual illness or death.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you both so much for coming and providing this wealth of information. It really is just a matter of, understanding that this is a part of life and accepting the reality that, we really don't want to leave our loved ones in a lurch. And so we try to make our transition as easy as possible. So thank you very much to our two panelists for coming into this space and sharing with us. We thank our viewers as well for putting their questions forward and for participating in the poll. And just to state that you have the opportunity to view the conversation on our website, watc.876.org. You also can subscribe and like the conversations and share with others. And so as we wrap, we remind you of the aims of the conversation, which is to provide a forum for people to have open and pertinent discussion on issues that are very important to us, to help people to navigate a world from a scriptural and a theoretical perspective, and also to guide people to pray aright. So we thank you once again, and we say thank you to our team who went and thought of the topic and invited and engaged our panelists, our Zoom host, Mr. Andrew Hutchinson, our social media correspondent who was working behind the scenes this evening, Father Kirk Brown. And we say thank you to all you viewers for coming out. I was your host for the conversation this evening, Monique Castle. Join us next month for our next conversation, and have a good one.